racially profiled by police. From a teenager to driving, through college, all the time. And my sons went through it for no reason. We just get stopped. And I guess my question is, you know I didn't attend the first meetings that you guys have had, but I just wanted to see what kind of change is going on from the police standpoint, because it seems like, you know, you see a lot of things on TV. It seems like the police always initiate a confrontation by asking questions and trying to get the person to either agitate them or whatever it is. And this, you know, I tried to become a police officer. I was on the list, but then I backed out. That was back in 1990, right before I turned 35. I changed my mind because of all the things I was seeing. And some of my friends, a couple of my friends went through it. They witnessed a lot of things. They quit. They quit. And it seems like, to me, I don't think things have changed since then. Maybe I'm wrong, but I've always told my kids, don't break the law, get a good education, respect others like you want to be respected, and just try to, you know, live a life that's normal. And they have. I'm glad they have. But growing up in Aurora, I went through a lot. And I'm sure there's cases where people have to go through it, and maybe they found something was wrong with the person, maybe they were lawbreakers or whatever, you know. Myself, never. I've only had one speeding ticket back in 1979. Only one. And I just want to see, because of the things that we see on Facebook or Instagram, it seems like when the police approach somebody, they seem to instigate the situation, and he gets blown. You know, it's just out of proportion. And that's, it seems like there's a systemic type of a situation that hasn't changed. And I want to know, what is Aurora, the Aurora Police Station, doing as far as training? Because there's a lot of Hispanics in Aurora, a lot of African Americans, people from all types of life in Aurora. It is a melting pot, and I think there's probably so many situations that go on because, of course, the body cams didn't exist. And I don't know, are they going to exist now or not, but things are kind of starting to come out of, you know, out of the closet, so to speak, because nobody had video cameras before. And I think it's a big thing, and yet nothing has really changed, I don't think. The last time, one of my sons, I got two sons and a daughter, but when they were growing up, I think when my son was 18, he was driving a sporty car, doing real well in his business. He kicked, Dad, I got stopped by the police. Why? You know, he just pulled me over. He was driving a nice sporty car for no reason. And that's, I don't know if things have changed or will they change, but I think we have to, as police officers, you know, that's a real tough job. You know, I respect the police all the time. And to me, I think we have to get the same respect back when we're approached by police. If you get stopped, and I don't think in Illinois, you know, if somebody asks you for an ID, if you haven't committed a crime, you don't have to show them anything. I don't know if I'm correct or not.
No, it's not.
You don't, right?
No, you do.
You do, even if you've not committed a crime.
You have to present identification when asked.
Papers, please.
I'm sorry?
Papers, please.
Well, I guess, you know, I mean, if you're walking, let's say you're going to the store, and the police come up and ask you for an ID, if you have not committed a crime, I don't know what the purpose of asking for an ID if you're just going to the store and going back home. That's what that's where things kind of get out of hand.
Then we'll ask the police when we get to that.
Okay, oh, I'm sorry, okay. But anyway, I think, there's things that us ourselves as just regular people need to know when police are the approaches were and ask us several questions. We should know, if we have to answer or not. Unless you committed a crime, then it's different. But I think, and I'm here to learn. I want to see what changes the city's put in place for police officers. It's a tough job. And, I think around the country, if nothing changes, just what happened in Compton, California, I think it was, that was terrible. But, I think that's what's going to start happening if nothing changes. There's something needs to change. But, they can't, you can't have people going out there just because they're upset. You can't do that. But, it's hard for us to control how other people think. But, they get this picture in their mind, and I don't know, I think, I want to know what's going to change. Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So I appreciate the fact that you were willing to be open and
Yeah.
transparent about your past,
Yeah.
because that's pretty significant.
Yes.
So I appreciate that. So thank you. Number two would be based on what you've seen in the past, because you do have a historical perspective. Would you be willing to be involved with some type of police group to showcase, community involvement from someone?
Oh, most definitely, yes, most definitely. I think, and I came here because I think I want to get more involved. I want to teach the community. I want to learn from the police. I wanted to become a cop. I stepped back. But yeah, I want to get involved more.
So then is your question more so like about trust? Is there a trust issue from your perspective?
No, not from my perspective. Because when I was approached, I always told my kids, just answer the questions and do what they ask. Because if you see what happens before all the time, you don't want to, if you start acting different, opposed to what, now they're going to suspect you're doing something wrong. Now things can get worse. And that's what I was thinking, don't do that. That's for an ID, give it to them. Well, you can't say, well, did I do something wrong, officer? I mean, now they're already grown. They're living their own lives out of state. But, as when they were growing up, that's what I was talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The dialogue section will talk a little bit more about those systemic changes, Mr. Fonseca, and with
Sure.
the body camping training. We will have a dialogue with them.
Okay, thank you.
Next person. We'll clean the mic off after each person.
Again, my name is Mark Zellman. I've been here for about 15 years, working and living in Aurora. Last July, I participated in discussion of the use of force policies and training in particular. And it was a really, really good discussion, facilitated by some really good leaders. One of the things the gentleman said near the end was that the policies look solid, the training looks uniform, and the gentleman said, you can train, but you need to act and hold people accountable. Because nothing changes if we don't have action on the ground that makes men and women accountable. What had gotten some focus that day was the discussion of duty to intervene or intercede policy. And it seems to me that all of the discussion around reform of what you could call bad behavior, tragic behavior too, often comes down to, if you look closely, other individuals observing from the get-go behavior that moves towards what is tragic or unacceptable. Can we, perhaps the chief can address this, the mayor, perhaps you could talk about this too. What can we do to encourage interceding and intervening to prevent escalation and tragedy from happening? What are the barriers in place that keep a man or a woman from acting? Why do men and women act, and why do they not act under those circumstances? Is there some repercussions to acting and not acting that I'm not aware of? And can the police look into that and look at the psychology of that? That's really what that's about, the social psychology of acting and not acting when you need to intervene. We know what takes place in our public forum now when you see leadership disregarding rules and no one questioning that person. You see it when bullies act in hallways. You see it all the time. You see it when your buddy is using racist terminology in a crowd and no one speaks up. This can be much worse though, the consequences are greater. And so those are just my comments. Lastly, a commendation. About 2 years ago exactly, I was lost. I had been on some medication for a disorder I was dealing with. I was recovering from a serious disease, and an officer named Wesley responded to a call by a woman I had been talking to for directions. I was 2 miles from home, and I should have known where I was, but I had no idea. She was concerned, apparently. He responded, and came by, and another officer came by to help, and he kept it cool. He figured out what was wrong, because I probably wasn't behaving exactly normally. And he got me home safely, that's the only thing I remember is his name. He was kind, he was careful, and asked all the right questions. It kept me calm and safe. So I think we need more of that.
Thank you. This is a dialogue will talk a little bit about the repercussions of use of force. So thank you. Next.
Wrote it down. One thing I want to say first, thanks. I do believe that we've seen positive steps since the change initiative, and even Aurora was probably ahead of a lot of municipalities with respect to policing reforms before the change initiative. I was most thrilled to hear Alderman Jenkins during a recent committee meeting say that we want the best civilian review board in the country. And along these lines, I would like to suggest that we need a citizens oversight that is stronger than an appointed citizens review board. And we as a community and those in city leadership need to prioritize crime prevention over throwing more taxpayer dollars at regulating a broken and biased criminal justice system. And it's true that Aurora is not Kenosha, we're certainly not Joliet, but we still do have the Marcus Randall case. A video recorded incident in which Mr. Randall's eye socket was kicked in by an Aurora police officer during a traffic stop. The follow-up actions of the officer to destroy the phone of the person videotaping the incident, and then intimidating and harassing her, are an attempted cover-up. And this is why we need strong, independent citizen oversight here in Aurora. So I want to use this opportunity to influence the outcome of the civilian review board that's being discussed before the council, and I'll be sharing these thoughts with the rest of the council as well. The board should be elected and not appointed. While I understand the urgency to enact a meaningful change with an appointed board, the long-term fix should involve an elected board. To prevent conflicts of interest, candidates for an elected citizens review board cannot take political contributions from pro-law enforcement groups, unions, attorneys, or anyone in the criminal justice system. Number 2, composition. In the same way that we require our tax assessor to have a background in real estate, we should require that members of the Citizens Review Board have no ties to the police department, police union, that they're not retired police officers. The board should be composed of a diverse group of people that are reflective of our community. If we truly want citizen oversight, the board must have subpoena power, the ability to convene a grand jury, and a budget that allows them to hire a competent, qualitative investigator to do the work of the board. This person should work for the board, not city council. This independent investigator and the board should have access to all information affiliated with the case, including the past suspensions or incidents in the officer's employment history. The board should not cost the taxpayers more money. The board can be funded with some resources that are currently being used for internal police investigations. A member from the board should participate in contract negotiations with the police union. And finally, the informed decisions of the board should be binding. A citizens review board will not address the root causes of crime, poverty, and income inequality in our city. But if we're going down this road, we need to make sure that it is strong, independent, and builds trust through oversight. Finally, I want to suggest that if a homeowner uses a video surveillance system as a deterrent to crime, that a strong citizens review board is the best deterrent to the abuses of power that Marcus Ringel experienced here in our community. So I agree with Alderman Jenkins that we could have the nation's finest review board, but it needs to be independent, elected, and have funding and power and teeth. And I believe that we are headed on the right path. And I thought I would only have 3 minutes here, so I'll just throw in one other thought on the residency issue, because we faced something similar in East Aurora while I was on the school board. And what we found is that, look, Naperville pays more. They have less unruly classrooms, smaller classrooms, and if teachers want to make more money and have an easier life, they can go to Naperville. And I would assume that if somebody didn't want to live in Aurora and then they could make more money elsewhere, that's fine. What we found with teachers is those teachers that really give a damn and want to fight for our kids are going to stay here and not chase the bigger dollars. And we should seek to have those people in our public safety division.
And so when we do the dialogue, we'll talk about process, where we are with the CRD now, and where it goes forward. Next speaker.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Lily Rocha. I do not work for any elected officials. I'm just here as my own, as a private resident of Aurora. Thank you for the City of Aurora for hosting these. Thank you for Lee and for the chief and various people being here tonight. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to you guys. Just a couple of things. I would love a little bit more in social media about actual crimes happening in Aurora. While I do love, cutesy events going on around the community, I would like to know more about shootings. I would like to know more about sexual assaults. I would like to know more about where this is happening so that if I'm running and going for my evening jog, I know to be careful about certain areas. For instance, there were a few months ago where there was a gentleman on the east side who was tackled and brought in for assaulting a young woman, and a lot of the comments that were posted on social media were like, if this has been, people have been reporting this in the area, how come if this wasn't out and about on social media, how come the police didn't alert people in the neighborhood to be careful, especially, women or people who are smaller or fear for themselves when they go outside. So I would just love some more transparency talking about the actual crimes that are happening. While it is important to know, what stores are, giving alcohol to underage children in the neighborhood, I think it's equally important to know about crimes in areas where it's happening so that people know to be careful. So I would love to see more about that. I also want to, make sure that you guys are thinking about community-based policing with undocumented populations. So while it's wonderful to have, police officers go out and give their business cards and build rapport with citizens, think about how that feels for somebody who's undocumented, who's terrified of police, who no matter how friendly that person is, that person has the ability to possibly tear their family apart. So just make sure that you're thinking about undocumented residents when you're talking about community-based policing and what that looks like for them, because it's going to be mightily different than what you're going to have for the general population as a whole. thirdly, I'd like to encourage you guys to think a little bit more about investing in SIGHT, which is your really awesome program that you have a social worker and some social worker interns working for you. But as I see it, I think you guys have 370 something officers and 1 social worker. For a city of 200,000 people, that's, I'm sorry, how many?
6.
You have 6 social workers?
Yes. 4 contractors and 2 full-time, yes.
Okay. I'm wondering, how many you would need for a city like this, and then also, thinking more broadly about, is 911 the best place to call somebody if they're having a mental breakdown, for instance, and if not, what about, actually separating the mental health responses from the crime responses and creating an entirely separate department from the police, and making sure that instead of police, it's actually social workers and people trained in intervention for the mentally ill. For instance, I was actually out at an event, a public event, and I was managing it. We had a Black woman come in who was having some mental health issues. I hesitated to call 911 because I did not believe that the police, if they were to show up, would handle this very appropriately. However, I was also kind of fearful for my safety because I didn't know if she had a weapon, I didn't know if she was having a breakdown, I didn't know what to do. So luckily some people in the area kind of helped me by, and we were able to get this woman some water, and we were able to sit her down and make sure that she was comfortable. But ultimately, cops are not social workers, and we have to stop treating them like that. And even if you pair up with them, it's still not enough. We have to fundamentally change how we think about policing, making sure that we're not criminalizing people for having a mental health crisis. And again, that might require a whole different department and a whole different way to approach this. That might take more than a few listening sessions, but that's something that I encourage the leadership in the city to think about. And lastly, I just want to talk again, if we're talking about more broadly about these issues, I hope that we think about how to deter crime. So instead of addressing it reactively by hiring more police to address the increase in crime, how do we stop crime from happening? And we know that research shows that in communities where there are opportunities are lacking for employment, for after-school programs, for support services, for elderly support services, for immigrant outreach, for all of these community service from the cradle all the way up until their mid-20s, making sure that they're there and that they're culturally appropriate. So every community has something that speaks to them and that's holistic, engages the family in ways that we are able to participate in. If we have those support systems, we're gonna lower our rape crimes. We're gonna need less police officers, and we just won't have to spend as much money as a city on police. We also just won't have to spend as much money on police pensions. I know the city, pays a lot of money for police pensions, so if we could just reduce the number of police that we have, it actually saves the taxpayers money. And we have a budget of $77 million with APD, but our youth and senior services are $450,000. So, thinking about, can we take some of that money from police, and instead of hiring, which I know right now we're actively hiring, is that money something that we can budget perhaps for another area where we're looking to deter crime instead of addressing it reactively? Thank you.
There's a few people here. Next speaker. Any other speakers before we move to the dialogue session?
I think with the dialogue session would be
We'll start to address some of the questions.
the question that we asked.
Mhm.
Okay, gotcha.
Hi, my name is Gabriel Bradford, and I work with the Aurora Police Department for their youth court. And so my question is, how are you going to address proactive youth policing? And how are you going to address youth and outreach to youth? Because as a member of the youth court, we have a lot of kids come in who don't exactly have a great relationship with their police officers and don't feel comfortable talking with them. And so I just want to know how you intend to proactively reach out to these youth before they get in trouble and before I get to meet with them, and how are we going to go together as a community and help the police officers and the youth and police officers.
Any other speakers? Once, twice, three times. We'll start the dialogue, and I'm going to hand this mic to the chief, deputy chief, and then we'll go back and forth. You can answer questions there. And then Mayor, if you need to address it, you can come here for it. So going back to our first speaker, we'd look at changes in PPD. So when he grew up in the 70s, what systematic has changed, what some of your training, those body cameras weren't there, but we just go over some of those changes that we moved from the systemic, what he considers racism and prejudice to where you are now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fonseca. So I'll go through these. I tried to jot down what some of your concerns were and what your experiences were and how we've addressed them. And as I mentioned at the change sessions we had on our policies, we've come a long way from 1970 and from 1990. I came on in 1991, and many of you heard me say this, that it feels like I've worked for 2 police departments in my life. I feel like I've worked for 2 different cities in my life because of how different it is now. So to address what is different, I can be pretty specific. First of all, about the induction of an Office of Professional Standards. So in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, we did not have an internal affairs section. And so police accountability was very inconsistent. And as a young cop, the discipline that you usually received was, I can't curse in church with Reverend McCann, but really it was kind of, you just got an ass chewing from your supervisor, and that was the extent of it. Sorry, Reverend. And so then over the years, we've adopted what we call, a professional police department. We looked at the profession as a whole, and these are my predecessors. I can't take credit. I can just give you kind of the roadmap where we looked at policing as a profession, where before, it was we recruited people from the military. If you were a soldier, then you should be a police officer, and that's pretty much how our recruitment went. And then throughout the years, we recognized that it's a profession, which means it's professional, which means that we have to have a level of standards. So introducing that was a pivotal change in our police department. And then on top of that, laws were enacted because of things that were happening regarding racial bias, just as Mr. Fonseca said. So we have our, by law, we have to compile traffic stop data sheets. Any stop that we have with a civilian, whether it be in a vehicle or a pedestrian stop, we have to document. We have to document the reason why. We have to document the race, the gender, and all of that is compiled. And we have to submit that to the state. And of course, every year we go through our stats throughout the year, and we make sure that we don't have any disparities. And if we do, we call that officer in and speak with them. Sometimes we just find it's the particular assignment that they work in, where it's predominantly perhaps a Latinx neighborhood, so they would just come in contact with more of that population, of our population of Latinx. And so, but we look at those statistics and we hold officers accountable for that. On top of that, our policies. We have adopted policies that prohibit racial bias. Well, we have policies where we have procedural policing, and all of that are fancy words. So to say, and I think someone mentioned it also about policy. I think it was Mr. Zellman that said policies don't mean anything without action, and I absolutely concede to that. I'll give you every police department that has a stack of policies this thick that say thou shalt not racially bias, participate in racially biased policing, thou shalt not commit excessive force. And yet, if you don't have a culture that holds people accountable to those policies, then they mean absolutely nothing. They're just a word salad. And so we have that accountability, and it's built in. And on top of that, it begins with culture. And I can speak to the fact that our actions do follow that policy, because 90% of and we have our on the portal right now, we have our citizen generated complaints against police officers, and you will see that 90% of them are generated by supervisors within the police department. Only 10% are generated by citizens. That speaks, that's a very important story to tell, because that tells you that we police ourselves. that tells you that our supervisors are constantly looking at the reports that officers are writing, and they're noticing if there are policy violations, and they're writing those policy violations up, which then goes to our Office of Professional Standards. So it's not enough just to have the policies. You're absolutely right. You have to act on those. On top of that, we have cultural diversity training. We've brought bias training in. We have, and this is more than what is even required by the state, and that's what we talked about in our training session. I am so proud, and I will hold our training up to any other training, any other police department in this state, and even across the nation. You will not find more training. We have the minimum standards that we have to have for the state of Illinois, and on top of that, we have 6 additional mandatory trainings per year for each of our officers, and we address de-escalation, we address duty to intercede, we address cultural sensitive and bias policing and procedural justice. So we have a very well-trained police department. Now, that is not to say that there are not violations of policy. That absolutely happens, and Mr. Lash, you brought it up. We have had excessive force, and I will tell you that police officer was held accountable. We even sent that file over to the state's attorney's office just for oversight to make sure that it was outside of our hands as well. So I can tell you, and I'm speaking on behalf of, and even our union president here can say, is that not any one of us wants to have a police officer amongst our ranks that tarnishes our badge. It's not something that we want walking among us, and so we are going to help hold people accountable. And my philosophy and my mantra in the police department is I will stand with you when you are right, and I will part with you when you are wrong. And that is the culture that we're trying to create. So I think I answered Mr. Fonseca and Mr. Zellman's, unless I missed something, but I took those bullet points there. So if there's anything I missed, let me know.
Great job. I'd like to pick up on where Mr. Wilson asked Mr. Fonseca about involvement with the Citizen Police Academy. We have a number of members who are here, including the president. Can you explain the academy and how people can get involved?
Yeah, and it's, I invite everyone to, to come ask questions or to sign up for the next course. Obviously, we're on hold at the moment because of COVID. But I will tell you that in my experience, I've been with the Citizen Police Academy for going on 5 years. I know a number of the officers personally, and my experience has been great. I'm a Hispanic in the state of Aurora for 20 years. Some of the culture that the chief talks about, I have seen firsthand. I know a lot of the officers really, really care about the community. There's always a bad seed here and there, but if you'd like to get involved, you go to the city's website. There's an application to be completed. It's a 10-week course, and it really is eye-opening. It's eye-opening to experience some of the things that the officers experience and to learn. And it's really eye-opening from the perspective that you as a citizen should really educate yourself. We talk about, well, what's the law on this? I'm not saying everybody has to be a criminal justice major, but you should have a basic understanding, right, to protect yourself and to be able to speak, pretty educated about the subject.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Mr. Fonseca said, I don't believe I should have to give my ID if I've done a crime. Deputy Chief, if you can keep going on that and give some of the high-level rules.
I just wanted to respond real quick on Mr. Fonseca's, on some of his comments. He mentioned respect. That was a word that stuck with me. And you're absolutely right. Respect pendulum swings both ways. Our officers and every citizen encounter should be respectful because we're held to a higher standard. But also, you have to realize that officers are people too, and when they're being disrespected, sometimes they don't take that very well. But nonetheless, that's one of the pillars of police community relations is respecting one another. And I'm sorry, gentlemen, sorry, I forget your name over there. You. Oh, okay, Curtis. What is it? Curtis, okay, yes, Curtis. Curtis also mentioned the word trust. He talked a lot about trust, and I think that's the foundation for all police-community relations is trust. And I like to use an equation, and it's accountability plus education to me equals trust. And what I mean by that is the education part of it is citizens have to educate themselves on what they can and can't do. You know, you brought up the scenario about the ID and whether you have to show your ID. And trust me, there are a lot of people that have that same question. What I can and can't do in a police citizen encounter. And the situation depends. There are certain things that are consensual encounters, then there are certain things that aren't necessarily consensual. In your example, you mentioned, someone came out of the store and all of a sudden a police officer walked up and said, hey, let me see your ID. Well, you haven't committed a crime. However, you don't know why the police officer there, they may be there investigating the crime. And if the person says, well, he's, Hispanic male, he has glasses, dark jacket on, and you walk out of the store and that's what you look like, they're going to stop you, man. They're going to ask for your identification. At that point, they're investigating something you don't really necessarily have a choice as to whether you're going to show it to them or not. You see what I'm saying? So there's different scenarios that you do have a right to just go about your business, but there's others where you won't. And so I try to get, especially my friends and family, I try to educate them. It's the same situation if you were pulled over and you're dealing with the officer and asking you to step out of the car. Some people say, well, I'm not getting out of the car. Well, the Supreme Court says you have to get out of the car. So I've seen minor traffic stops turn into major felonies because people just didn't know what their rights were and what their rights are. From the accountability portion of it, when we do have police officers that are not doing their jobs properly, then they have to be held accountable because the public sees some of these things on TV and where officers have messed up and they get their jobs back or there's no punishment. It's very difficult to trust the system where you see people doing wrong and they're not being held accountable for it. So you're absolutely right. We have to, as an entity, you have to do a better job of holding officers accountable. But if you do that and the public educates themselves, I think that's how you help build that trust and build that bridge, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Mr. Fonseca, feel a little more comfortable, a little more knowledgeable? Definitely. We'll make sure you have the contact information for the police academy as well. And knowing David and Michael and Jennifer, since they're little, you did a great job raising your kids. We appreciate you and your involvement.
Chief, you mentioned the demographics, and you sort of monitor what arrest records people have with respect to minority populations. Do the demographics of arrests and traffic stops match the demographics of Aurora?
Do they match the demographics of? Yeah, that was the point I was trying to make. Is I think there's more.
Well, you're looking for individual cases to find individual police officers that might be racial profiling.
Exactly.
I understand that. But overall, across the city, do the demographics of the people that are stopped match the demographics of the entire city population?
That's a good question. I don't have the statistics right in front of me, but I can look at that. But I know that there's never been any flags raised, and so I'm assuming that all of the numbers fall where they should, and where there's nothing that would be glaring to say that one particular population is being stopped, in disparity. I know that your questions were about the Citizen Review Board. That I can't speak to. That's a legislative action. But you did talk about residency for police officers. That's also a legislative action. So, but if I could just go and address Lily's comments about social work.
If we can come back to Lily.
Yeah,
okay. But coming in order on looking at officers and use of force, Mr. Fonseca, you defined it as instigating. Mr. Zellman, you said, what are the repercussions? We have our union president here. Asked him to come and just share what that looks like. What are the repercussions of those officers who have those use of force cases? You can come down to the mic there. Sorry.
tell you that no police officer wants to get into a physical fight. I can guarantee you it's the last case scenario that anyone wants to be involved in, especially nowadays with COVID. Who wants to be touching anybody? There are repercussions of any use of force, obviously on the individual, but also on the officer. They're human beings too, and those situations certainly weigh on them. If there's a situation where someone has improperly used force, I think the department is very effective in investigating those matters and delivering discipline. And I think the union is also very effective in supporting those decisions when they've done a thorough investigation and everything's been done fairly. I can tell you that the union has also reported acts of wrongdoing. I personally have delivered to the Internal Affairs Division incidents of inappropriate communications with citizens that they made contact with through the course of their work. We had an officer who struck a handcuffed subject and was reported by his coworker. When I first got elected to the union board, I discovered that one of my fellow board members was stealing. These people either no longer work, actually, yep, I think none of them still work at the Aurora Police Department. So the union is really a partner with management when it comes to being that governor on keeping quality people, good people, genuine people, because that's really what this police department is filled with. And I'm very fortunate to represent these folks, because they really go out on a daily basis and they really give up their all. And I think if you've lived in this town for a long time, you probably realize that a lot of the successes that this city has made is because of, in great deal due to the hard work of the police officers. Okay. I also wanted to just briefly address, as far as the youth, I actually used to be the coordinator of the peer jury of the youth court. And it's actually a unique program. Not every town has that. And I would just say that that's a testament to what Aurora is already doing. Because if we didn't have the peer jury or the youth court, those kids would be referred to the juvenile court. They would have a court record. And that's the city's commitment to providing those different programs that are alternative to sending kids to court, because we, as a police department, realize that kids will make silly choices for a variety of reasons, and sometimes they cross the line, they break the law, and there's no sense in taking a situation like that and causing lifelong harm by imposing a record on them. So I think that Aurora, just by virtue of even having a youth court, and actually several other cities had, when I was coordinating, came to Aurora to see how we did it, because we also mandate that you work with a counselor, that you do something for the city, do some community service. I mean, so there is some accountability, but there's also the ability to keep your record clean. And one last thing I did want to say is I just wanted to extend my gratitude. I don't think I've paid for a meal in the past couple of weeks while I'm working. There are people out there who are anonymously and secretly paying our tabs. And I don't know how else to thank you. We had a 30-member team of officers who were out on training, and someone footed the bill for them. So there's a lot of anonymous people who are really supportive of the police, and maybe just because of the current times, they don't really feel comfortable saying it out loud, but they're doing these very subtle things. I was going through the drive-thru at Dairy Queen. Please don't judge my eating habits. But this woman flies off the road and runs up to the window, and I thought this one's trying to get run over to get ice cream. She was paying for my order. So if any of you are in this room, or if anyone's hearing me, I want to thank you, and all 250 members that I represent want to thank you as well. That is very much appreciated.
Thank you. Question?
So what if an officer does something while off duty, like commits a felony? Is the union going to support them and
always consider anything, everything's negotiable. I'm gonna be the first one to say that. That case is rather unique, but I can tell you that the King County State Supreme would not charge that case. Okay, and there are other factors involved in that case that I'm not going to go on with it. But for every one person that you see that the union has defended, you can probably count at least one, maybe two others where the union has been able to look in the eye and say, there's really nothing that we can do. Being a member of this union is not an insurance policy to commit misdeeds, misconduct, malfeasance at all. And I certainly had to have that conversation. I'm sorry. We'll see if we can get a separation agreement of some sort, but there's nothing that we're going to do as far as defending our resources for a follow-up.
Well, I hope that you would be transparent and, you don't have to share like the specific case and the officer or anything like that, but transparent and showing that you are doing, you're making those efforts, because I think there's a lot of cases throughout the United States where we see police unions protecting officers that have done wrong. And so I would like to know that the union is doing that, and, you know, we want to see both sides of it. We want to understand what their role is in officers, you know, being disciplined or not being disciplined.
Sure, and I guess I should say, as far as this union is concerned, like the steak and potatoes on our plate are really the wages, the benefits, and things like that. I mean, discipline is just a smaller component of what we do. We don't really file a ton of agreements when it comes to discipline matters. Again, usually the OPS process runs pretty seamlessly. But the union-employee relationship is similar to like a doctor-patient or a attorney-client. And that's why we might have some issues with being so transparent, because obviously the union member has to be able to talk to a union rep and know that there's a confidentiality. And that's whether you're a police officer or you're working at the Jewel. You know, those union reps are there to represent those officers, and there has to be the ability to have a frank and open dialogue with those people, with the knowledge that it's not going to get divulged or leaked out. So there's just a couple of hurdles to what you're suggesting, but I recognize that would be helpful. If people knew, wow, you know, the union is really doing a lot of positive things to make sure that there's a good filter to keep those bad folks from working. But, you know, I've never selected any of my members. We don't do hiring. Obviously, you know, I have to deal with the cards I'm dealt with, basically, but I really give the Aurora Police Department a great deal of credit with their screening process, their hiring process, their background investigations, and the training regimen. I really do think, and I would hope that you would all agree with me, that we have some of the greatest men and women who wear uniform anywhere around.
Those three officers that left Aurora for dubious situation, do you know if they moved on to a different force, or is there a mark that follows them around where they can't get hired?
I don't know if they're police officers right now.
Sorry?
None of them are police officers right now anymore.
Okay, good.
One more question for the union rep, then we're ready to move on. Go ahead.
So I'm a union carpenter, and last night working at 120 feet in the air, we have a zero tolerance policy if you don't tie off. The rule is for my safety. If I don't tie off and I fall, I die. In your line of work, if you guys make a mistake, it's not you that dies, it's somebody else that
It could be.
It could, right? But I just want to know, we police our own, right? So if my buddy fails to abide by the rules, everyone's quick to make sure that for their protection, they're following the rules. Are you open to independent oversight?
I
know there's internal oversight, and some idea of policing each other's own. I'm just curious if what your reaction is as the union president to an independent citizens review board.
I've always said, and I've said publicly, that I have no objection to receiving feedback from informed citizenry. I guess at this point, I'm still learning about what this civilian review board is going to be, so I'm going to reserve, any endorsements until I have all the facts and figures. But I know that this is an ongoing process, and I have committed to working with the city to coming up with something that's kind of holistic and that everyone can get behind.
Thank you. As we're going to transition back to Chief and Deputy Chief, looking at youth work and work with social workers. But on the topic of civilian review boards, if you've been keeping up with the news or following city council, one of the primary recommendations under the Mayor's Change Initiative was the research for the implementation of a civilian review board. He came out of the gate with that. We listened to those who organized protests. We listened to those who talked directly with us. Said this is what we really want to see. And so the mayor made that point number 2. First was body camera, second was civilian review board. Fast forward when we get to the recommendation phase, 6 times, 6 different separate recommendations. A number of you were in those sessions was for the establishment of a civilian review board. We then start to research under the national organization, the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. NACOLE is the acronym. And looking at these different cities and CRBs, the acronym for Civilian Review Board throughout the country. The process that we're going through now with our city council is the resolution. It's the engagement. It's like, look, we want to make this happen. We want to make certain that the community knows that this is what we want to do from the perspective of community members throughout the city of Aurora. And so our resolution process is now coming to city council next Tuesday. And that vote will allow us to move to an ordinance phase. Generally, when we codify, when we bring in a new board or commission for the city, it's an ordinance. We make the ordinance, it goes to city council. This was a 2-step process for a number of reasons. The primary reason was that we would be able to make it as public as possible, as transparent as possible, to go through the resolution. And through these last 3 weeks, we've gotten a number of community recommendations. Hey, we hear what's going on, we're reading in the paper, we're watching online. We suggest you do A, B, or C. It was moved to what we call a consent agenda, which means the full city council said, let's move forward with the resolution. The ordinance is like the marriage. It's engagement, we're ready to lock it in, then we move to the ordinance. And what we'll do very publicly after next week's vote as a consent agenda item is then open it again to the community as we build out the ordinance. These are the specifics to everything the CRB will offer from around the country. We look, benchmarking best practices, those CRBs in the state, and we'll open that up publicly online that you can also offer advice, offer opinion, offer recommendations. We're making it as transparent as possible. That could be another, and will be another month-long process from a committee level to a committee of the whole level to another subcommittee level and then back to city council as we put the ordinance together. Ideally, we'd wrap that process prior to the end of the year, but as we know, we want to do this right. It's a major accomplishment for the city of Aurora as we move forward there. So please stay tuned. Watch the city council meeting next Tuesday, 5 p.m. on the city's Facebook page, and follow the news releases after that, how you can be involved in the CRB as we move forward. So just wanted to frame that out so we can kind of move from that conversation.
I want to add to that, to take away from that, but can I add another question to the list? Yeah. So, my thought is, what would the city's receptivity be to perhaps an attorney, city attorney, or a criminal defense attorney town hall, where they just simply present the basics of what is your civic responsibility, either for Illinois state law, Kane County, or the city of Aurora, and have that as something that, I'm not asking them to give legal advice, but just simply point out this is what you have to do as far as if you're stopped, you have to give your license. Yeah. If the officer tells you to get out of the car, it's like the problem calls, you have to get out. Help educate people so that they know when someone's going awry based on what they've gotten from not the cops per se, but from the officials who will be the ones likely to prosecute on the other end, meaning the city attorneys, perhaps just for legal, concerns with the city, because you got to protect the city, of course. Yeah. But then maybe work with legal firms in the area that are criminal defense attorneys that can also help educate folks on what that's like. Yeah. And again, a town hall where people just come and listen and have that as an opportunity. So that's just another idea. Yeah, we're definitely 100% open to it. We look at, from police department standpoint, where the request was, can we do a community education piece on what Mr. Fonseca said? What are my rules? But then there was also the request that we move to the mayor's administration level on an expungement seminar. Now, I know that's to the far other end of the paradigm, but being able to take those same individuals in law enforcement to help those who have expungible records to get expunged, we can definitely put that right into the list as a community education piece. And that would be a series or like some type of, maybe courses or so, just in essence offering civic engagement on how the legal system works in the expungement. That's a great idea.
We'll build around your schedule to moderate it, and we'll get it started. We're going to come back over to Chief again, looking at, talk briefly about youth work, and then speaking to the issues of Lily Roach's spoke on. Thank you. We see your hand, Ms. Cole, as well.
So first off, actually, we speak to youth outreach. This is a very important endeavor for us, and so important that we started a youth academy. Man, this has been going on now. This was before my tenure, and it was actually threatened. It was financed by King County, and when King County ran out of money, we took it over. And the reason for that is because we wanted to, and I love the term, I got it out of one of our listening sessions when someone said, you know, you guys thought about growing your own. Teachers do that, educators, and so and I just didn't have a name for it, but that's precisely what it is. So our youth academy, between the ages of 13 and 17, and we look at those kids who are perhaps on the precipice, where, you know, if they're not with us, perhaps they could be, you know, hanging out with the wrong crowd. And we get recommendations from our community members and from our school resource officers or from educators on what kids would be ideal for this program. So interestingly enough, it started to be, you know, grabbing kids who potentially could be just going down the wrong path. But now it's become this hybrid of both that and kids who want to go into law enforcement. And so the hybrid has actually been, it is truly elevated, and it's so very dynamic now and synergistic. And what happens in there, we have, I think, 6 police officers now who went through our youth academy. And that speaks volumes for us. We lost track of them after they graduated our youth academy, and it's just like the Citizens Police Academy for adults, but it's for kids, and it's basically a summer camp. And they get out, and our officers are, this is about putting the resources to officers for this purpose. You know, we have a lot of calls for service, but we recognize how important it is to take these officers and put them in this role through the summer months. And they get up with these kids and they make them run, and the kids hate every second of it in the first week. And then they love it. And they often say that, you know, and you've all seen the transformation that takes place from week 1 to the end of the academy. And because we lost track of those kids, we then started a Youth Academy Alumni Association, so we can keep track of them and either have them test for our cadet program or become police officers. So that is so important for us. The mentorship that we have in this city with our youth is tremendous, and it's through the Youth Academy, but not only that, but we have school resource officers at every middle school and every high school. And those aren't just school resource officers that are there for what some people think. We had some recommendations from our listening sessions. It's like, get rid of cops from schools. And it was interesting because I just sat back and watched the educators stand up and say, no, no, no. These police officers who are in our schools are building bridges. These police officers are not there for enforcement. They will take enforcement action if it comes to that, but the majority of their job is mentorship, coaching, redirecting. And most of the time, there are kids whose first interaction with a police officer is with a school resource officer, and it's a good interaction. It's not a negative interaction on the street. And then, of course, when, you know, non-COVID times, we have our neighborhood groups where our officers go out and they hang out in the neighborhoods. And so when we have board meetings, and then just the basic street level. When we talk about recruitment and retention, recruitment starts, we have 307 sworn officers, and that means we have 307 commercials for this police department. And that means that every officer is a recruiting officer. And even if they are in contact with an individual on the street that may even be in a law enforcement capacity, they can still influence a person. And I've had several people come and say, I was arrested by this officer and he treated me with human dignity, respect, and that has made me want to become a police officer. And that's what recruitment is all about. So we take youth outreach very serious. And then I'm going to go to social media, or
social workers.
I'm going to skip that for just a second and go to social workers, and then turn it over to our PIO and resident expert on all things media to answer your question as well. But you talked about social workers, and you know, it's interesting when the initiative, the Defund the Police, came out. My first instinct when I heard that was, well, defund the police, what does that mean? And I'm not sure if the statement or the motto is genius or terrible, because it made a lot of people defensive. Defund the police, police, you don't wanna do that, but then when you delve into it, defund the police just means adding more resources to social workers, so that burden can come off of police officers to handle people in mental health crisis that have not reached the level where law enforcement is needed. So when I learned about what that meant, I thought, we have been asking y'all for that for the last 20 years to take this off our shoulders. But having said that, about social workers, that's why we have 6 on staff. We have 4 contracted employees and 2 full-time, and they go out and they ride with our police officers. But on top of that, we also have, our officers are trained. So regardless of whether we wanted this or not, we're trained. We're criminal justice professionals, but we're also social workers. Every police officer in our department has been trained in, it's called mental health first aid. So they are trained to go and to handle incidents of mental health crises. And sometimes it might be a medical issue. Sometimes it might be where they've come in contact with someone with autism and they're trying to communicate that. But all of that falls under that umbrella of de-escalation and trying to determine what the problem is. And what we've done is we've completely turned our paradigm on how we police. Before we came in and it was, let's do things fast, take people into custody. Now, we've learned to slow everything down. Unless we are trying to prevent life from being taken, we know that we can take a step back. And I don't care if a police officer stands outside for 3 hours and tries to negotiate with someone to put a knife down. I'm not looking at them to go, get on to that next call. So this is the culture we built, to slow everything down, determine what is the root of the problem here, and can we deal with it without having to use physical force. And a lot of times we can, but then I'm a supporter of the hybrid of social workers and police, because I've also talked with a lot of social workers who can only engage to a certain time and place in an incident until it becomes violent or until a weapon, and that they're not trained to handle that physical aspect of it. So I would hate to send a social worker in to someone who's having a violent episode, and I would not want that social worker to get hurt. We've seen that with DCFS workers who go there without support. We've had DCFS workers killed, pushed downstairs. And so I'm a big proponent of the hybrid. But so I hope that answers your question about what our philosophy is. But I'll tell you, we would love, we have our social workers handle those incidents, and if we don't have to step in, we will happily take a step back. So that's the hybrid approach. So.
Thank you. And I do just want to say, I don't believe cops are social workers. To be a social worker, you do train for a few years. I do know that cops have mental health training that are a few hours to a few weeks. It's not quite the same, right? So, and that, there's still one social worker for about every 50 cops. The caseload must be pretty insane. So, working to, improve funding for that. And I do know that for site program, there was a hodgepodge of funding for that. It wasn't a priority for the agency. I had to come from grant funding and from, alderman discretionary funds. It should not come from discretionary funds from the alderman. It should come from the main budget for APD. So I'd love to see that, and I know you guys are really working on that. But, also thinking more broadly about, do we separate APD from mental health, and, having a different department, or having somebody who's, instead of just, a trained cop with a few hours of mental health training, if we do have a social worker who cares for the plainclothes officer, so that that person can go and respond to calls, but also feel safe that there's somebody there, but the person who's having a mental health crisis doesn't feel threatened by somebody brandishing a weapon.
Right. No, understood. Absolutely.
And let's transition to social media with Paris. We can do this briefly. Then Ms. Cole, I know you had a response, and then if you want to still do that, then we'll conclude with the mayor. I told you we'd get you out of here on time. Here's our police officer.
This counts as me being in church.
It does. I was going to tell you that. So we're looking for me on Sunday.
So as a department, we've been working on upgrading technology over the last couple of years. And right now, you've seen that with our OPS dashboard, where we're getting a lot more information transparent right now. And we just met earlier this week about it. We are working on getting that information about the calls that officers are responding to, reports, and all that information onto a Google map. So you can see, you can go right down into your neighborhood, you can see what's happening, you can see the reports over a certain period of time, what kind of crimes have occurred over the past month or 6 months, and use a little slider. We just, as a department, needed to upgrade technology, and we got to the last step of that, or we're getting through the last step of that right now, with our records management system being upgraded, and that's been just an ongoing process from our CAD upgrade, and then the records management You brought up that instance of the incident in the park where people were being pushed down when they were riding their bikes or when they were running.
No, it was females who were being assaulted. A couple of them thought they were about to be raped. A few weeks later, I think that person was caught, and that's when it came up on social media, and a lot of people were commenting like, "Why didn't I hear about this before?"
Yeah, so in specifics, and because that case is still ongoing, I can't get into all the details of it, but we weren't able to put an MO on that one person together until that information came out at the end. So when we were able to take that person into custody, realize that there were more cases connected that had been reported, but when they were initially reported to us, there wasn't enough information to say this is number one, the same person, or that they're even at all connected. It was only after we brought that person into custody we were able to make some connections and tie them together. And that's why that information went out, and we were asking the public to see if there had been any potential more cases out there that we weren't able to tie together at that point, or if they believe they may have been connected. So sometimes just when we have initial information, sometimes there's just not enough information about the suspect. We're not able to tie that together, and we don't know that something is connected. So we can't necessarily put out.
I guess have like a hybrid where you're not necessarily going into the MO and feeling like we're building a case, but rather it's more for informing the residents of the area, like, hey, there's been a report, we're still investigating, but just wanted you to be aware of any suspicious activity between these streets. Again, as a female jogger who likes to go jogging in Aurora, I really appreciate that.
And I totally understand that, and we definitely will, whenever we get information that rises to the community alert level and that we can put something together and say this is all in one area, we absolutely put that out, because our safety of our community is the most important. In this instance, we just didn't have that information. Our detectives didn't know that any of those were connected. They weren't even around the specific same area. So that's why in this specific instance, we weren't able to put that out.
Can I ask a question?
We're gonna have to keep moving on time. We're closing out on time. You all there? Any else on social media?
Oh, yeah, about the shootings, we put out a.
We put out every time we have a shooting, every time we have an incident, we put it out there on social media. Put them out right away at any time of the day. So we try to get that information out there, and then we also encourage people to not only can you give tips over email, over Facebook, over our different social media platforms, but also to call us, to call Crime Stoppers, because a lot of that information that people have seen, maybe they don't feel comfortable having the police come to their house and take the information, but they can follow up with us later and be able to give information that way, because little bits of information in any crime do help us potentially put the pieces together and then solve the crime overall.
Thanks, Paris. Appreciate it. Ms. Cole, is there a comment you want to make?
It is just a comment, and it's on Curtis. Great idea on education and about having to know what you're supposed to do if the police stop you. Car stops seem to be very, very dangerous for everyone. My suggestion is, and I'm actually going to write an email to our 3 legislators tomorrow, is that what to do if you're stopped by the police, incorporated into driver's education. I know it isn't now. Also, that there be a couple of questions on your driver's license written test about what your expectations are if you are stopped by a police officer. I probably would have been on a test. I would have aired, and yes, I have to do what the police tell me to do. If they ask for my license. But I wasn't positive until Chief Zeman said that yes, you must, if a police officer asks you for your ID, you must give it to them. So those are things that maybe you take for granted, everybody knows, but no, everybody doesn't know that. So that's all.
And states are different. That's why some states do have that posted on their websites that show what a civilian responsibility is, some don't have it. So that's a great point.
And thank you,
And
Ms.
just
Cole.
so you know, that came up in the listening session, and Representative Stephanie Kindlewitt was in the audience. So that was a suggestion that was brought up during our change initiative as well. And so duly noted, and make some noise about that.
That it be included in driver's education?
It was
Yes.
driver's education, legislation, you name it, and education.
Oh, I'm still gonna.
But certainly a letter from Linda Cole will help move that along. We're quite certain of that. We appreciate it. And I remember that moment, Chief, when they said it was kind of like that light bulb in the room. We all felt it. That makes sense. that makes sense. As we prepare to conclude, and of course these conversations, you know, we look to continue every Thursday. Every Thursday next week, we're at St. Therese. The following week, we are at Main Baptist Church. The week after that, we are at Impact Church. Then we'll wrap up with the first Thursday in November downtown in Society 57 or the Orchard Church. You're welcome to join. The conversations will differ with the groups that join. Before I ask the mayor to share a few closing, Chief Zeman talked about the Youth Academy. And some of these things are long-term, you know, founded in 2002, 18 years ago. And that was under the federal Weed and Seed program. And that summer, 3 youth programs were founded. Youth Academy, Boys to Men, and Rites of Passage. 18 years later, all still going strong there. So we saw the foundation under the federal Weed and Seed program. And at that time, the founder of the federal Weed and Seed program was a young community-based prosecutor named Richard Irvin. So when life fast forwards us 18 years later with him as mayor, we see the connections that continue to happen throughout this community. Mayor, any final remarks?
You know, first of all, I want to say thank you. Thank you all for coming out and participating in this community listening session, because, you know, without your input, without your voices, we won't be able to make the change that happens. Community helping Aurora is necessary growth and empowerment. You know, we know that it's necessary for any good community that cares about our residents that we've got to grow. We've got to be better tomorrow than we were yesterday. You know, we've got to grow if we're going to ever progress into the future. You know, and I look at it as we need to empower our community to feel like, you know, they're part of this process. Now, you folks came tonight and we heard some ideas, and many of them that, you know, as you said, the chief was over there taking copious notes. You know, we're looking to implement some of these ideas. Yeah, I've always said, if I'm the smartest person in the room, we got a problem. You know, so we need to hear from our community, hear from our residents about what we need to do to change. Again, not change for the sake of change, but change for the better, for all of us. You guys are the first in this type of community opening session where you just came and said what was on your mind. And I appreciate you, know, taking this opportunity, taking time away from your families to come and help Aurora move forward, to help us grow, to help each other be empowered. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the next session.
Thanks, everyone. If we can give a round of applause to Pastor McCann, Kimberly Adams,